Hey everyone, how are you doing today? Ready for another math lesson? All right, so last week, just to review, we learned about the perimeter of different shapes. The perimeter is the distance around shapes, around the outside of a shape. And then we learned about the area of rectangles. Today we're going to learn about something called a parallelogram, which is kind of similar to a rectangle. So, are you ready? Are you ready, Emmy? All right, let's go. All right, guys, we're going to start off today with a couple of definitions. So our lesson today is about the area of parallelogram. But what is a parallelogram? So we'll start with that. Parallelogram is a quadrilateral, which means it's a four-sided shape whose opposite sides are parallel and of equal length. Okay, so what does parallel mean? So parallel are two lines that are always equal distance apart. So basically a parallel lines would be always going in the same direction, but they're a certain distance apart, so they would never actually touch if they just kept going in the same direction. Okay, so these two lines, you can see them, are always parallel. So parallelogram, a four-sided shape, and we'll talk about the difference between a parallelogram and a rectangle later. And parallel, lines that are always equal distance apart. Okay, so what we're going to first of all do is talk about what we did last week. We learned about what it means by the area of a rectangle. So area is the measure of the length of the rectangle, so L for length, times the width of a rectangle. So fairly simple, the formula, but always remember that area is measured in square units. So for example, if the area was, let's say the width was 5 centimeters and the length was 6, you do 5 times 6, which is 30 centimeters squared. It's two-dimensional, the width and the length. So the nice thing about a parallelogram, it's very similar, but there's just one little difference. So first of all, let's go back and talk about parallel lines. So in a parallelogram, the opposite sides are always going to be parallel. So this side and this side are parallel. So sometimes these little arrows represent, that means they're parallel lines. And then the other opposite sides are always parallel. So these two sides are always parallel. Okay, so parallelogram, the formula for the area is very simple. It's just the base times the height. Now, it's kind of like the same thing as a rectangle, length times width, but there's one little difference. They call it base times height, and I'll explain why. So let's say this is our base. So the height is actually not just one of these lines. The height is a little bit different because it's measured at a 90-degree angle from the base. So what that means is a 90-degree angle is basically a straight line up from anywhere on this base to the top of the shape. So this could be my height here. So a 90-degree angle often symbolized by this little rectangle. So this would be my height, h. Sometimes it's measured over here, sometimes over here. It doesn't really matter too much, always from a 90-degree angle from the base. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to point out was what's the difference between a rectangle and a parallelogram? Well, a rectangle is actually part of the parallelogram family. So a rectangle would have these two sides parallel, and then these two would be parallel. So a rectangle is a parallelogram. The difference is a rectangle, all the angles are always 90 degrees. So this is a 90-degree angle, this is 90 degrees, this is 90 degrees, this is 90 degrees. But in a parallelogram, all the angles don't have to be 90 degrees. Okay, I'm going to go over two examples with you. So the first example, so again, a parallelogram often is symbolized by these signs for parallel lines. So these would be parallel, the top, the bottom, and the top, and then the two sides. Okay, so the area formula, always important to have that formula written down somewhere, or if you can remember it. Area equals base times height. So again, very similar to a rectangle. So in this case, the base would be your 7 centimeters, and the height measured at a 90-degree angle from the base is 5 centimeters. So 7 times 5, 35, and it's in centimeters, and remember it's centimeters squared for area. Now I just wanted to point out, if you were given the side, this length of this side, let's say it was given as like 6 centimeters, you just have to be careful that you really aren't concerned about this side when you're talking about area. You're only worried about the height and then the base. Okay? Okay, let's go to the next one. So again, we have a parallelogram. I'll just put these. This means again that these two lines are parallel and then these two are parallel. Now we have this given to us as 4 meters. So let's do our area equals base times height. So we have our base, and you'll always be given the height when you're doing so it's not like you have to figure it out on your own. I just wanted to point out, sometimes you'll see a line like this. It'll have the height, and it'll be given on the outside of the shape, which is totally fine. So they might have the height here at, just say 7 centimeters, or 77 meters, because I have the other one as meters. So all they're doing is saying they're measuring it at a 90-degree angle. So like the angle would be here, they're measuring it at a 90-degree angle up to the top of this line. So 7 meters. So 7 meters, and then just 4 times 7 is 28 meters squared. Okay, so when you are working on your worksheet today, or when you see a parallelogram on a quiz or something, the height's always going to be given to you, so it shouldn't be that difficult. You just see those two numbers and you multiply them together in order to get your area.